little tune I just played, been paying my rent for over 30 years. But that's not how it all started. I was born and raised around the racetrack. Let me tell you about it. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, but we traveled around a lot. Here's a picture of me when we were in New Jersey. My dad was a racetracker, and we traveled from one racetrack to the next. Probably every couple of months we'd move. Here's a picture of my dad teaching me how to ride. He actually wanted me to be a jockey as well. My dad here on the left was one of the more famous jockeys in America. He was even the spokesman for Pierce Arrow automobiles. He made a lot of money as a jockey, but then he lost it all when he got too big to ride, and he eventually had to become a trainer. My mom was raised in New Orleans. She was from a sophisticated family in New Orleans, and she probably never would have had anything to do with my dad, because he was little and because he was a racetracker. But because he was one of the most famous jockeys in America, I think she was more attracted to him for that reason. When I was 10 years old, we moved back to Kentucky. I went to school one day, and none of the people in Kentucky could pronounce Shropshire. That was my name. So all the kids just called me Slopjar. I go home and I tell my grandmother, they're calling me Slopjar at school. She said, tell them you're related to Henry Clay. Next day I go back to school. I said, I'm related to Henry Clay. And they said, who's that, Slopjar? We moved back to the farm in Kentucky. And when we moved back to Kentucky, we were raising tobacco. It was some of the toughest work I'd ever done. I was covered with tobacco gum all the time. We had to pick these big worms off the tobacco, and it was a never-ending job. You could work out there 24/7 if you wanted to. And that's where I started riding in earnest. I was an exercise boy, and I used to ride horses on the farm we had in Kentucky. When I moved to Florida with my family, my dad was a horse farm manager. I used to go to the barn every day, and there was one foal there that was so sick that the veterinarian had to come out every day and give him shots. They stuck so many needles in him that they named him Needles. I was proud to be his exercise boy because that was my first brush with fame. Needles won the Kentucky Derby, the Belmont, and finished second in the Preakness. Run, old Needles, run, old Needles, run. Shinbrook's gonna get you in the bright and shining sun. Bright and shining sun, Lord, bright and shining sun. One of the great things about Florida, they didn't have any tobacco there. Here's a picture of me at my high school prom. I was extremely shy, bashful, farm-raised, and very little. And I don't remember the girl's name, and I'm sure she doesn't remember me either. Shortly after I graduated from high school, my mom and dad died in an automobile accident in Miami, Florida. It was quite a tragedy for me at the time. Even though I'd been riding horses so much that I was making a living, I wasn't worried about how I was going to continue to make a living, but I really missed my mom and dad. And there was a wonderful family in Ocala, Florida, that said, well, you can come and live with us if you'd like to. This family changed my life in a lot of ways. Whereas racetrackers pretty much think about nothing but horses, this family liked music, dancing, they liked sports. They were well-rounded people, and it was a new sort of look at life for me when I was around them for a while. I was working as an exercise boy and a groom in Florida, cleaning out horse stalls, but I always wanted to be a jockey and still thought I was going to be a jockey. A friend of mine came by and he said, you know, Elmo, you're getting a little big to be a jockey. And I thought, yeah, you may be right, but I could be a veterinarian. He said, well, You have to go to college to be a veterinarian. So I hitchhiked up to Gainesville, Florida, the University of Florida, went into this huge room, registered for a bunch of courses, and paid my $75. Suddenly, I was a college student, and it changed my life. I went to the University of Florida, graduated there, and here's a picture of me when I went to Auburn University to veterinary school to become a veterinarian. After I graduated from Auburn, I went to New York and started working for the New York Racing Association as racetrack veterinarian for Belmont Park, Aqueduct, and Saratoga. When I was in New York, it was the most exciting place I'd ever been in my life. But there was almost too much excitement for me. I'd lived on the farm for so many years that after a couple of years of being in New York, the intensity of it sort of wore me down. It was 1966. I was working for the New York Racing Association at Aqueduct, Belmont Park, and Saratoga racetracks. I was the veterinarian who used to examine all the horses before they were going to race every morning to see if they were healthy enough to run. In the afternoon, I would stand by the side of the racetrack and watch the races, and if anything went wrong, I'd go out and help. Sure enough, it did go wrong one day. A horse pulled up lame, so I went out and helped loading him on the ambulance, and they took him away, and I walked back and stood where I usually stand. Suddenly I hear this enormous commotion in the background. "You lousy bum! You bum! Get him out of here!" So I didn't know what was going on. The guy next to me stands there, he punches me, says, "Hey buddy, they're talking to you. They're telling you that you let that horse race that they all bet on, and now the horse pulls up lame." And I said, "Oh, and I looked around me, I thought, maybe it's time for a change. And I went to California. Everyone told me San Francisco is a beautiful place, and it was much more beautiful than they could even describe. Another thing about San Francisco, everybody out there seemed to be doing everything they wanted to do. It was 1967, and people were going up and down the streets. It was really the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. There were even veterinarians out there with ponytails. So I started working at a veterinary hospital there, and the fellow who owned it gave me an opportunity to buy the hospital. So I bought Arguello Pet Hospital, and suddenly I was in business in San Francisco. One day I was driving down the road, and I heard Foggy Mountain Breakdown come on by Earl Scruggs. It was the most astounding thing I ever heard. I couldn't imagine that anyone could reproduce any kind of sound like that. So I immediately wanted to get a banjo, and I did. And then I started practicing every day at my veterinary hospital at lunch. I'd get a sandwich for lunch, and I'd eat it in 5 minutes so I could get 55 minutes to practice the banjo. This is a Gibson Granada banjo, approximately dated the year of 1936. It's one of just a handful of banjos like this. This is pretty much a twin to what Earl Scruggs has. And I would imagine that if I were to sell this banjo, I could probably buy a couple of grand pianos. I was playing the banjo as much as I could, but I wasn't good enough to play with anybody else for a while. There was a group in San Francisco called the Styx River Ferry that used to play. They'd play till 1 o'clock at night, and I'd go watch them in a club, and then they'd go home and play until daylight. And I started going to their house every Saturday night and listen to them play all night. There were 4 or 5 other people just like me who used to watch them, who played various instruments, mandolin, fiddle, guitar, whatever. And then we all got together and formed a band. And we started playing 3 or 4 nights a week, and I was working at the veterinary hospital 7 days a week. But it's still, music was so much fun that I wanted to keep doing it. Here's another picture of the roaring Blue River. And as you can see, They all looked like hippies except me. I was the only one who looked like a businessman holding the banjo. And this is when I first met Patsy. She was a fantastic guitarist. And then we had another guy that was a great banjo player. And so we got together and called ourselves the Homestead Act. And at this point, we became one of the more popular bands in San Francisco, and we were playing probably 5 or 6 nights a week and some afternoons on the weekends, and I was still working at my hospital 7 days a week. In 1973, we started a radio show in San Francisco on KSAY, which is now K101. We went out to this little studio and did a 1-hour show where we would play bluegrass records and talk about bluegrass and then read commercials. Within 6 months, that show was a 3-hour show and one of the highest rated shows in San Francisco. We moved it to a big rock club called the Orphanage, and every Saturday afternoon, that show would sell out maybe 400 or 500 people in the Orphanage, and we would read the commercials, hire bluegrass bands to play there. We didn't actually pay them, so we just had them play on the show. So it was called the Great San Francisco Bluegrass Experience. It's 1974. Patsy and I are playing with the Homestead Act, one of the more popular bluegrass bands in San Francisco. Agent comes up and he says, "Would you like to audition at Harold's Club?" Whoa! We go to Harold's Club in Reno. We audition. 2 weeks later, the agent calls up and says, "You got the job." 6 days a week for a whole month. So I hire another veterinarian to take over my spot at my veterinary hospital. And then as soon as I do, the other two say, "We think this is a bad career move. We don't want to do it." I call the agent and say, "We can't do the gig." And he said, "I'm not telling the booker that. You have to tell him." Patsy and I drive all the way to Reno, and we walk in his office and say, "We can't do the gig. The other two bailed on us." He said, "That's okay. You two are the stars of the show anyway. Get a bass player and come on." Then suddenly, instead of the Homestead Act, it's Elmo and Patsy, our name up on the marquee, right along with Shrimp Cocktail and Indoor Plumbing. Now she's gone and I don't worry. I'm sitting on top of the world. Big time. Patsy and I performed at the Harvest Festival, at casinos in Reno and Tahoe, in hotels pretty much all across the country, ship cruises, and we had a great act. We rehearsed constantly, we performed all the time, and we watched every other performer perform to try and learn what they were doing. So this is a picture here of us performing at the Harvest Festival. Patsy was a great musician and very charismatic on stage. Of the two of us, she was by far the better musician. She had started playing when she was a child, and so she had that wonderful built-in sense of rhythm. It's 1979. We're playing at the Hyatt Lake Tahoe. The day we arrived, there's a blizzard, so the band is supposed to be leaving, couldn't get out. We do our first show that night, and a man comes up to me after the show. He says, "My name is Randy Brooks, and I have a song that I think would be so perfect for you, but my band won't let me play it." And I said, "Well, there's a guitar, let's hear it." He picks up the guitar and goes, "Grandma got run over by a reindeer, walking home from our house Christmas Eve. You can say there's no such thing as Santa, but as for me and Grandpa, we believe." In 1979, we recorded the song "Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer," written by Randy Brooks. And this is one of the first recordings we had of it. We made 500 single copies of it. And this is a picture of it right here. It was on our own record label called Oink Records. We recorded "Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer" on a single. and didn't know what to do with it. So we gave a few copies out to our friends as gag gifts. One day I'm driving into San Francisco, listening to my favorite disc jockey, Gene Nelson, on KSFO. He's having a contest. People call in and say, "We want to hear it." Other people call in and say, "We never want to hear that song again." So I'm really interested to find out, what song is this? Gene Nelson says, "We got our 50th request for this song. We're going to play it." And suddenly on the radio comes, "Grandma got run over by a reindeer." I heard my favorite disc jockey playing my song and had no idea he even had it. I took 10 copies of the 45 into Tower Records and asked them if they'd put it in the store for 50 cents a piece. Well, they thought it over and they said, "Okay, we will." I drove back home. It was about an hour. And there were 2 messages on my machine when I got home. And one message said, "This is Bill from Tower Records. Could you bring in 25 more copies of that grandma song?" And I said, "All right." So I listened to the next message, and the next message said, "This is Bill again from Tower Records. Could you bring in 500 more copies of that song?" All right. When I picked myself up off the floor, I loaded up the 490 copies I had left and went straight for Tower Records. "I'll do anything you say. I'll play them barking dogs all day, but please don't make me play that grandma song again." In 1983, I made a video of Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, but meanwhile, I decided to sell my veterinary hospital so I'd be able to finance the album and the video. As a result of the grandma song, we got a gig playing at the boarding house in San Francisco where Steve Martin got his start. We drove down there and there was a big crowd out in front milling around. And when we got up there, they had these picket signs that said, "Stay away from this concert. It's ageist, sexist, and violent against women." When I got out of the car, all these old people had these signs, and I was walking in, and one of them kept waving this sign in front of me that said, "What's so funny about a dead grandma?" So I thought, we're going to have to stop singing the song now. But in actuality, being picketed by the Gray Panthers was really the best thing that ever happened to us. The old gray mare, she ain't what she used to be many long years ago. Quadrupled our sales. In 1984, Epic finally decided to sign us. So we signed up, and they did a great job of distributing the record. In fact, that year, in the month of December, Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer outsold Michael Jackson's Thriller, which was also on Epic Records. A DJ named Jack Daniels got fired for playing Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer 27 times in a row. In 1985, Patsy and I went our separate ways. And then I started playing with another band called Elmo and the High-Rise Hillbillies. And we still played a lot of bluegrass and similar stuff that Patsy and I used to do. And that started my career as Dr. Elmo. Here's a picture of me with the High-Rise Hillbillies right here. In 1989, a woman named Rita Abrams called me up. She said, "Elmo, a mutual friend told me that you were going through a divorce. I'm going through a divorce also. Let's write a song about it." So I went over to Rita's house, and in about a half an hour, we had, "Won't you just sign this prenuptial agreement? And I swear I will share all my dreams with you. If you don't sign this prenuptial agreement, I'm afraid all of my nightmares will come true." Well, as soon as we got together, Rita and I began to find many things that we thought were funny, and we really had a chemistry together. So Rita and I have been an inspiration to each other for a long time, and we still write together today. And another song that we worked on was one called the Betty Ford Clinic that goes like this. "I got to get in to the Betty Ford Clinic. I got to find a way, I swear. Though I never have been strung out, I would love to say I hung out with the stars who check in there. One of the songs that Rita and I wrote for Twisted Christmas was called Grandma's Killer Fruitcake. And here's a photo of the making of the video. Look at that possum pie.
Grandma's Killer Fruitcake.
This is a picture of Pam Wendell, the lust of my life. I met Pam in 1991 at a music party. We became friends, then we started dating, and then we became much better friends. Pam always encouraged me to follow my dreams and never give up. In 2002, she started guiding my career, and Pam's the one responsible for booking all my concerts and also booking hundreds of interviews with radio and television every December. And I don't know about Grandma, but it's not Christmas without Junior. I call her Junior because he's a couple of years younger than I am. Sheldon Wendell, the man who helped me launch my Twisted Christmas album in places that didn't even deal with regular musical channels, like Long's Drugstore and other national drugstore chains. Thank you, Sheldon. A disc jockey named Jim Eason on the biggest radio station in San Francisco bought a copy and started playing it. And then suddenly, Long sold out of all of them. Well, Epic Records had put old Grandma on the back burner, and I was back working at the veterinary hospital. And one particularly busy day, when I was performing a lot of neuterotomies and other things at the hospital, they said, "Elmo, you have a call from New York." I answer the phone, and on the other end, they say, "This is Ross Britton from Z100 in New York, and you are live on the air. Now I want you to sing some of your songs from your new Christmas album." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm busy. I'm working on animals here. I can't do that." He said, "We're live on the air. How about this? I'm looking at your album right now. Sing Going on a Date with Santa." I went to the mall and I sat on his lap. He gave me a pinch and I gave him a slap. He hung candy canes from the front of my blouse. I felt something stir and it wasn't a mouse. He said, "Great. All right, can you sing something else? What about Send Me a Wife for Christmas? Make her look like a model from Vanity Fair with a figure that makes a man kneel down in prayer. She'll be wild for my wide body and thinning hair. Santa, send me a wife for Christmas." He said, "That's great." And I said, "Wonderful, Ross. Great to talk to you. Now I got to get back to the animals." So that night when I went home, my message machine was full. And it was all disc jockeys from all over the country. Not only was Ross Britton the biggest DJ in New York, but he also did a morning prep service, and he told all the DJs what to do in the morning on their shows. And one of the things he told them to do was to call me and interview me at Christmas. That began a long tradition of me doing radio and television appearances, hundreds of them every December, and that tradition still continues today. After Ross Britton sent out his morning prep sheet, every radio station in the country started interviewing me. And every time I would interview with a disc jockey on a radio station, they would say, "This is the most requested song I have ever had in my entire radio career."
Sing a hit for Christmas, I would be a Christmas millionaire.
Nancy Clary came on board in 1999 to straighten out my books and keep me out of jail. I loved working with her, but she quit because she didn't want to commute from her home in Novato down to my office in Larkspur. So I moved to Novato to get her back. was a smart move too, because it was Nancy who cornered a record executive on the escalator at the Hyatt Regency and accomplished the impossible. She got me a record contract with Sony Music. I don't know what she had to do to get it, but you go, girl. This man called up and he said, "Hey, is this Elmo?" He said, "We're listening to your albums and your songs now." He said, "I know you just wanted to have one song on one of our compilations, but we don't want that. What we want is to put out a whole Dr. Elmo album on our label." So there we were, back in business. Sony Records is putting out a whole Dr. Elmo album now. I was finally popular enough to get to come and play at Christmas concerts. And here's one of them at the Wells Fargo Pavilion in Sacramento.
He's not sure, but it'll be someplace that doesn't mind reindeer manure. I'm going on a date with Santa, the man with the big red bag.
Here's another concert where I played on the bill with Avril Lavigne, Gwen Stefani, Hilary Duff at the Arco Arena in Sacramento. It's 14,000 people in attendance. 13,900 of them were teenage girls. One of the musical highlights of Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer was to be able to play it with the Roots on the Jimmy Fallon Show.
You can say there's no such thing as Santa, but as for me and Grandpa, we believe. Sing it, Grandpa!
Yeah, baby. I got to be on Good Morning America last year. They got the LaGuardia High School choir to come and sing behind me. And when they first said they were going to do that, I said, these kids, they'll be singing off key, it'll be a nightmare. So as soon as I started singing with the LaGuardia High School choir, they were brilliant. They knew the song better than I did, and they all harmonized on it. One of the high points in my career.
It's not Christmas without Grandma. All the family's dressed in black, and we just can't help but wonder, should we open up her gifts or send them back? Send them back! Grandma got run over by a reindeer, walking home from our house Christmas Eve. You can say there's no such thing as Santa, but as for me and Grandpa, we believe. Sing it, LaGuardia! We got run over by a reindeer, walking home from our house Christmas Eve. You can say there's no such thing as Santa, but as for me and Grandpa, we believe. Merry Christmas!
It's kind of funny, but I think Grandma will be around for Christmas for a long, long time. Don't you? That's something, isn't it? I've had a lot of lucky breaks along the way, but the luckiest break I ever had was teaming up with you, Junior. From the aisles of Long's Drugstore to the stage at GMA, you choreographed my calling like a classic ballet. You guided my star every step of the way. I could not have done it without you, Pammy Window. Pam, you made my dreams your dreams, and then you made them all come true. if my grandmother or my venerable ancestor Henry Clay would be proud of me or my accomplishments, but I do know one thing: nobody calls me Slopjar anymore. When I was a kid, I always imagined that I would ride a thoroughbred to fame and fortune. I never dreamed there was going to be a reindeer. One of the things I just love to do at Christmas is go down the aisles of the stores and squeeze all the reindeer and listen to them sing.